Hello and welcome to Microsoft's Higher Education Remote Learning Series. COVID-19 has created a challenging year for Australian universities. The impact has been so fast moving, there's been little time to shift courses online, to upskill staff, and to figure out how to deliver engaging online learning experiences for students. Join me in the next 4 episodes, where I'll be interviewing some academics from Australian universities who've been teaching via online tools for quite some time. The idea is to inspire others to help talk about some of the tools and strategies that they've been using to create rich online experiences and to have a discussion about what works and what doesn't. I really hope you enjoy the series. Hi everyone, welcome to our fireside chat today. We're really lucky to have Dr. Amanda White, who's the Deputy Head of the Accounting Discipline and also a Senior Lecturer for the Accounting Discipline Group at the University of Technology in Sydney. She focuses a lot in terms of her research around teaching and learning aspects of accounting education and also has a real passion around academic integrity. In 2017, she received a citation for outstanding contribution to student learning on top of a UTS award for individual teaching in 2016. So she's an amazing teacher, an amazing lecturer who's doing really, really fantastic things with students at UTS. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So just to start, can you just tell us a little bit about what you teach at UTS? Because I think you're sort of in a specialised sort of area of accounting.
Yeah, so most of the time you say accounting and people go yawn, or people will think taxes. But I teach auditing financial statements, which is really for public interest entities, public listed companies, rather than just trust management in what they say in the financial statements. They have an external audit firm come and actually check what they're saying in their annual reports to make sure that that's a true representation of what's been happening within that particular economic entity. So it's highly specialized. It's a field of practice that's quite large, but it's also quite difficult in that there's significant regulation, but it's also all based on professional judgment. So it's really the question of how long is a piece of string. And we have to teach students how to make difficult decisions, learn a new language, learn a whole lot of different skills that even if they don't want to become an auditor or work at an audit firm, will still help them whether they want to be an accountant, in finance, in marketing, in some instances, even musicians. So I have a former student who's a musician, and he said, look, if I didn't know about accounting and all the stuff that you've taught me throughout my degree, I wouldn't be able to have a manager, figure out how much I earn, what my royalty should be. So it's one of these really interesting topics that we teach at the end of our accounting course.
And so how do you make that exciting? I know you do a lot of work with video, and you on your YouTube channel and stuff. You've got lots of different videos and lecture content and sort of tips and tricks, guides for exams and all that sort of thing. So how do you use video to engage people? And if I was to start creating video content for someone else or for a class I might be teaching, what sort of tips or tricks would you give me about how to do that well?
I think the key thing is to be authentic. You just need to be yourself. And so all I did was I take me in the classroom, and I'm a big hand talker. I'm always moving around the room. I'm talking with students. I get excited and really passionate about my topic. And teachers I know are exactly the same. And so what you have to do is just convey that passion, that enthusiasm for your content area, that love that you have for your students through the screen. And sometimes that's a bit difficult because you're looking at a camera and it doesn't necessarily like nod. I say to students when we're having online classes, flick your webcams on so I can see you, because at least then if I know you're nodding, I know you're following. Or if you're like,
some feedback.
Yeah, I can get some feedback. And that's a little bit difficult when we're creating content. But I always think about my audience as I'm making whatever it is. It might be a piece where I'm talking to camera. It could be, I do a lot of doodling and explainer type videos where I hand draw. All of that, I just think, who are my audience? And if I'm not excited about this, why should they be interested in it as well? And so that's really that key, is to just be yourself.
Yeah, and so you mentioned about the doodling and the drawing and sketching, which I saw in some of your video content. Why do you do that? I mean, why do you think that's a compelling thing to put in video content for students?
I think For my students, we always had textbooks as our anchor of here's the spot where we start, and then the lecture and the tutorials run off that. And I found that often, especially with diagrams in textbooks, students could read the text and they could look at the diagram, but they didn't know how to create the diagram from the text. It just didn't walk it through step by step. And so when most of my students would come with questions, I would start by drawing out, okay, here's where we start. And then you take this extra bit of information and you add it in, and this is what it looks like. And for me, that was my best way of explaining to them how to get from A to B, was through drawing and explaining and really talking out loud about my thought process.
Okay.
And then, I do it in a class, and then a student would come and say, could you draw that again?
Right.
And then a different student had come to a different consultation. Could you draw that diagram we saw again?
Yeah.
And we weren't recording lectures at that point. This was probably like 12 years ago. And so I just started with a little point and shoot camera on a tripod over a piece of paper, drawing and explaining. And, my students were like, this is so great, especially for students where English is not their first language. It might be their second or their third or their fourth language. This gave them the ability to pause, rewind, take notes. And that meant that when I covered a threshold or a basic concept with a video, if they had a question for me, it would typically be much more advanced. It would be, okay, so if I take that theory and I apply it and I do this, I'm confused about what the outcome would be.
Yeah.
And so I saw a huge improvement in student understanding because they could see my thought process. And I would explain it not in the words of a textbook, but I would explain it in regards to a TV show or something that they see in everyday life, something that's a bit more relatable to the topic area because they can't imagine what this looks like. And so those explainers just grew and grew, and I started writing on lecture notes.
Right.
So in the old days when you have overheads and you draw on overheads.
Yeah.
And then we moved to PowerPoints, and I'm like, I don't get to draw on PowerPoints. And when tablets came along, that was perfect because I could highlight on a tablet. I had lots of law recordings when I was an undergrad, and the lecturer would say, okay, this point here is really important. And I'm like, listening to the tape going,
Which point?
Which point? And so with a tablet hooked up into, our big lecture theatre system, I could highlight, I could draw, I could have the pointer so that as I'm moving the pointer around the screen, they can see that. For our students of saying, like, this is such a fantastic resource. It's more than just lecture over the slides. It's you actually showing me what's important. And I still do things like I have little blanks in my PowerPoint slides where I will just, to keep students engaged, blanks for them to fill in, a part where I might draw a diagram and explain it. And we found that's become a really useful tool. And I started sharing them just with my students. And it was my university at the time that said, we can't have all these sitting on our learning management system. Like there are too many files. And this is back in the day where we paid for downloads and uploads.
Yeah.
And they said, look, this is too expensive. Like, we can't afford. Why do you have 40 videos on this thing that's just meant to hold PowerPoints and PDFs? And they were the ones that suggested I go to YouTube. And then it was my students that said, could you make these available to everyone? Like, I want to send the link to my friend at another university. And then it just sort of grew from there into this big resource where we know students from all around the world. And audit is such a specialized area that often the academic who's teaching it may not have worked in the industry, doesn't have the industry connections I do to talk to chairs of regulatory boards or research experts. And so I thought, well, hey, how about I use this platform that has just grown without even me really doing anything to try and help academics build content that they need to help teach their classes, and then help students who might have an academic who's not a specialist. And then they get access to all that specialist information so that they can do better at their exams, become a better professional in this particular space. And so we see the work being used by students in undergrad classes, postgrad classes, professional qualifications. And it's really just there as this resource that I make for my students. Sometimes I make some specialized things more for a broader audience, but it's about open access, learn anywhere, learn anytime is my big thing.
And so you also focus a lot on the idea of sort of social learning. So I'll get you to talk a little bit about what that means for you and about how you foster students to work with students and them to learn together rather than just to learn from you as an academic. So can you talk a little bit about your ideas around social learning and how you do it?
Yeah, so when I think about social learning, I think about learning off each other. And of course, I don't need to learn the content because I've been teaching it for more than a decade, almost 2 decades. And so for students, I find that for them in learning something new, they can learn it as I tell it to them and as I teach it to them. But sometimes the explaining is better off done by someone who's learning at the same level as them, who's
Right.
starting out as well. And so for my students, we use team-based learning a lot, which is, you do something individually and then you do that same task as a team. And the idea is that more heads are better than one. So one week I'll really understand a topic and I can explain it to you. And I can say, oh, look, no, I think you've got a misconception. This is what I think is happening. At that point, someone else from the team might chime in and say, oh, actually, did you see this newspaper article that Amanda posted inside Teams? That has something interesting to do with this week.
Mm.
And so for me, setting up our classes is this process of them learning from each other, because we know from YouTube, from social media, from TikTok, that everyone's keen to learn something
Mm. Yeah.
in probably a non-traditional way. And people often say, oh, students aren't great learners. And I said, look, if they want to beat a level in a computer game, learn how to do something on their phone, learn how to do a PowerPoint trick, then, my dad actually says, if it's not on YouTube, it's not worth learning. So it's this idea of learning from other people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be experts.
Mm.
I'm a subject matter expert, but I want them to learn from each other. And the more that they can explain to each other, it's learn something, do something, teach someone else.
Yeah.
That whole process of feeling part of this community, and that's another big thing that I'm really big on pushing with my students is it's not just you and me in the room. It's you and all of your colleagues, all of your peers learning together, and everyone has something to contribute, whether it's a specific discipline knowledge, it could be some life experience, it could be a work experience. We have something to learn off everyone, and I want students to realize that not all of that learning comes from me. The
Mm.
discipline and context specific stuff might come from me, but that really sets them up for the rest of life,
Yeah.
that you can learn something from every single person that you meet in every single context that you meet them in.
And how do you do that, especially given now, right, with the pandemic and everything else?
Mm,
How do you use technology to pull people together into that community so that they
yeah.
know where to go to have those conversations and they can learn from each other as well as from you? How do you structure that?
I started out actually in social media in trying to
Yeah.
do this. My discussion boards were just wastelands of nothing.
Devoid
We'd
of
say, look,
discussion.
ask a question, and everyone would want to email me a question rather than use a discussion board.
Yeah.
And so at first, probably about 7 years ago, I turned to social media, and I worked with a social media strategist, Kimberly Lee from PR Social. And I think it was Australia's first social media only PR firm. And it just happens that she's my cousin, and we were talking about this at a family event. I said, oh, look, I'm looking to figure out how to connect with students outside my class. And we came up with a very clear strategy on how to connect with our students through social media. And for us, that worked out to be Facebook, but now it's also LinkedIn. And now I have this fantastic community of alumni, of viewers of my YouTube channel from around the world, where if I pose a question, I find a great newspaper article, and I'll write a little blurb about, like, what do you think is happening here? What should the audit firm do? Or what should the management do? Or what should a regulator do? And then we'll have students chiming in. So some of those will be my current students. Some of those will be former students who are working in the profession. Some will be people from, countries all around the world, Uganda, the United States, Italy, Helsinki. We've had, a whole range of different people be part of this community, which is to say that, to really enforce that learning is lifelong. I want to make a commitment to people that if you want to keep learning from me after you leave university, this is the way you do it. Stay
Mm.
connected through social. keep up to date with the industry. And that also means that when I need a guest, and in week one, I wanted to show students that my subject is not just about the narrow field that I teach as one particular pathway in the accounting profession, but I wanted to show them that you could do lots of other things. And I put out a call on LinkedIn and I said, look, I'm looking for people to come to my class to talk for about 20 minutes on a panel about, even if you don't want to be an auditor, what could you learn? And I think by the end of like the first 3 days of posting that on LinkedIn and on Facebook, I had 10 people who were interested to come to a class, to be connected. And that's what everyone's looking for. I think everyone wants this feeling of being connected and being part of the community. And so for my students, I do that through social. I use Teams, but it also means not just being the content delivery machine. For me, it also means building that relationship. And so that means showing them a little bit about what my life is like. That, you know, here are my kids and look at this fantastic pumpkin I'm growing in my garden, or look at the size of this cucumber, or we had a zucchini that was like taller than my 2-year-old at the time. It's about sharing with them snippets of my life so that they know I'm a real person, which also means that builds trust in a two-way manner. So I had a student write to me and she said, through Teams, she said, look, Amanda, I haven't contacted any of my other coordinators because I don't feel like I know them enough. I know we've only had one class and you didn't meet me personally, but I feel like I know you enough to tell you that I lost my job this week and my partner lost his job this week with the closure of hospitality. And now we're moving back with his parents. And I'm really sorry I can't come to class. But, you know, I want you to know that you reaching out to us every day and hanging out on Teams for half an hour every day is letting us know that we're there, that I'm there, and the university is there for them if they need it. And in these times where people are feeling socially isolated, they're feeling alone, you know, I think that's really important that we are part of their stability. We can be part of that support network if they need to reach out, and that we can also do it in a way that's fun. I don't have it, it's not right here, right now, but, oh, yes, it is. We have themes every week for our class. So this week, the theme is tropical, beach, or under the sea.
Oh, nice.
And I happen to have this amazing lobster hat that I won.
Don't we all have a lobster hat?
At a competition. But, you know, it's creating those sorts of moments where students can just come to class during the week, smile, and go like, okay, this is an hour and a bit where I can just enjoy learning and not be so stressed about the other parts of my life. And for me, that's what teaching's always been about. I came into academia to be a teacher and to support students, not necessarily to be a discipline-specific researcher. I did a PhD because that was part of the requirements, but my main goal has always been supporting students, the welfare of students. And that's not just academic welfare, that's all of that other well-being stuff that goes with it as well.
Yeah, true. So we had a little bit of a chat earlier, and you mentioned, so maybe it's more linked to your role as the deputy head of the accounting discipline, I suppose. But one of the things you were thinking about is how could we use technology to take some of the administrative load off people who get, you know, lecturers or teachers or support staff at universities get asked the same question 100 times. And so you happened to meet someone from Microsoft, a researcher called Jonathan Gruden, and he started talking about conversational agents or bots. So can you tell me about what happened there and what you've managed to do?
I've always been a real keen ed tech person. So whenever there's a new tech thing to try, I'm like, oh, that looks good, let's try it. And my students are used to me saying, oh, we're going to try a Padlet, or we're going to try Miro, or we're going to try, you know, Kahoot, or whatever it might be. And so as deputy head, my responsibility is to about 30 subjects and their students and their coordinators, and making sure that students are getting the best experience learning-wise that they can. And in talking with my colleagues that teach large subjects, and so when I say large, I mean first year accounting has 1,800 students in it.
That's large.
Yeah. First year management, you know, in the Bachelor of Business, all of our first year subjects have this almost 2,000 student capacity. And so in talking with those academics, when we're in the kitchen or in the water, around the water cooler type conversations, the comments are always, oh, even though I've put this information in my learning management system and I sent them an announcement about it and it's in the lecture slides, I'm still getting emails about when is the midterm test? What topics does the test cover? If I'm sick, what do I do? And so when Jonathan came out, I was really interested in the idea of using conversational agents, which is really like chatbots. So if you've gone shopping, a little bot pops up saying, oh, how can I help you today? Or there's bots when you talk to Telstra or to, a lot of online businesses. I thought, why couldn't we do this for accounting? And at the same time, a colleague of mine, Stephen Kutzi and Astrid Schulman in South Africa, they've been using Facebook Messenger to create interactive bots for students. I didn't like the idea of using Facebook because I was a bit worried about what would happen to the data that might be used in those. But when Jonathan said, oh, look, we can build a bot with a Microsoft framework, and you could put that into your learning management system and all that data stays with your university. I thought this is one way where we can reduce the emotional labor of being an academic, because when you've received hundreds of those emails and you think, oh, I've already talked about this 50 times and you're still asking me, we don't want that frustration to bleed through into our communications with our students and how we deal with them. And so I thought, let's try and build something. So we used Lewis and the Azure framework that we had within our university to build a bot. It was somewhat successful. When our main issue was that this bot for accounting was in the back end connected to all the other bots of the university, which sometimes meant it got confused. So sometimes you would ask, I was sick, and it would direct you to the staff leave bot. So, there are lots of irks and quirks that we're working on, but students were much more likely to ask a question to a bot. And then they get their answer straight away. And so for academics, we're trying to reduce some of that emotional labor. There were some funny outcomes, though. Like a student said into the bot, I love Justin Bieber. And then the bot said, UTS offers confidential counseling services. So it sent them to counseling.
I love it.
Result of that. But it's getting
funny.
more and more sophisticated as we go. And we found that students, we thought they'd type in whole questions. They actually just typed in single words like final exam. So knowing our audience and really working with analyzing the logs of the bot are really helping us move forward. Those projects are sort of a little bit on hold at the moment as we crisis teach in this current environment. But, the next step up from that, of which I am dying to get installed on our servers, and I have in principle arrangement that we can go forward with this, is Dr. David Kellerman's QBot. Which, after you train it with a couple of weeks of data, will actually start answering student questions and link them back to where that discussion has happened previously. And the fact that that's open access, when I talked to David originally about it, he's like, oh yeah, this is going to be open access. You can access it free. You just need to implement it onto your system. I was just super, super, super impressed. And the people that I know that have done little trials on it, I don't think anybody's gone a full-blown implementation yet, because we were all at that point of pressing go just before institutions needed to shift to online learning. But that's something, we're really interested in moving to. And that idea of customized learning and adaptive learning and pathways and allowing students to do more if they want to is really something that I'm interested in, so that we can create the best learning experience for our students. Learning in higher education often seems very one size fits all. Here's the assessment pack, here's the learning, here's how we're going to do it. And I think if we can provide more of a customized, but within certain parameters approach in the future, I think that's going to really help our students a lot.
And you mentioned about the the amount of effort that lecturers and academics have to put into answering all those questions and so forth. And now we've got this new layer of complexity, right, around COVID and around shifting to remote learning. How do you now manage your classroom? Like, so you're working from home, you're teaching from home, your students are all home, managing that, and how do you help, or how is the university helping other lecturers to sort of transition to this without overloading people and freaking people out?
Yeah, I think it's been really. I think my university was great. We had a 1 week pause, and I was actually really surprised in 1 week how much we could do to change subjects and transform subjects. I thought we'd really struggle, but academics, I gave academics 24 hours to come up with a plan of how do you plan to deliver your lecture? What are you going to do with your tutorials? Do you need to change assessments? And within 36 hours, we used Microsoft Teams to coordinate what everyone was doing, a common sheet in Excel. We had questions, we had discussion. Oh, who's tried this? Who's tried this? And I think for us, this has been a really great push into using a lot of new technologies that we were looking at introducing for research and for administration purposes, and then giving them new life. And the fact that we have a pandemic as our catalyst here doesn't change the fact that now we've got a whole different way of learning. We had more people turn up to a staff meeting because it was held online than we ever had when people were actually physically turning up. Because it was just more flexible. They could do it from wherever. But, institutions have started thinking about, okay, what's our framework? How do we move online? Then they've delegated down to faculties. Okay, you've got choices. My institution was really great. My associate dean of my business school said, we're going to leave the choices up to you, which some academics thought, oh, I'd rather be told what to do. But I think giving us that flexibility to design what we thought was best for our students, what would work best for some of our staff. So some of us, like I was already moving to Teams back in the end of 2019 as part of a trial to move entire subjects onto Teams. So I was already quite comfortable in that space. Some of our other academics who had never recorded a voice over a PowerPoint, who'd never spoken directly to their camera, to their students, besides when I would help them make a welcome video every year. How do I do this? And I think the amount of upskilling that has happened in the last, for us, 2 weeks has been enormous. And I think everybody is really on board with how do I make change? And when something's not working, they're very quick to say, this is not working, Amanda. What else could I do? I'm having a problem with Zoom. Is Teams the better place for me to be? How could I use Teams? What could I do in my learning management system? How do I chunk my content? So I think that, almost all of my colleagues are just 110% on board. We do have some people where obviously technology is not their forte, and providing the right support there, where an academic says, oh, I don't know if I want to be on camera, or I'm not sure about, text chats with people, that we're providing them with the right support in those instances to help our students learn as best they can. Everyone, and even within my particular accounting discipline, we now have a Teams group for accounting educators around the world. Friday nights they have drinks. People are sharing what's happening. If you're making content that is common to a couple of different subjects or different sorts of courses, people are sharing those resources as well, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's become really important, that sense of community as well.
Yeah, and I think just in wrapping up, I think the accounting discipline at UTS are very lucky to have a Debbie Head like you, because your passion for teaching and for student learning is really comes across when we talk to you. So it's been brilliant to have a bit of a conversation with you and learn about some of the thoughts you have around social learning and about you sort of structuring your course content. So I really appreciate your time, Amanda, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me.